You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do. Hello, people-centric leaders. Today, I have with me Bethany Taff and Stephanie Anderson, and we're going to talk a little bit about meetings. So the other day, I was having a conversation with my husband, and he was like, I'm in meetings all day, back to back, all day. And I was like, yeah, me too. Like, it's a lot. I think that's crazy. And then I looked at our calendars, and I was like, man, a lot of us are in back-to-back meetings. Now, it makes sense for someone like us where our job is to go and actually meet with people. But also, I was thinking through, like, how effective is that? And how much space in a day do people need? And how do we create those sort of habits? And what do we do with that? And is it our job to just like sit in meetings all day? So I thought I would bring it here and talk to you guys about it and get the help of Bethany and Stephanie and talk through meetings, just like this meeting culture and how insane it is. I also think it's gotten worse after COVID because now they're all virtual. And so you can just like sit in one spot all day and click next meeting. So I wanted to talk about that with you guys. Bethany, how many meetings do you have today?
Oh, that's a really good question. Let's go check out my calendar and see, because I think there's a lot. It's pretty full. So I have this meeting, and then I have one right after this. And then I do get to, I have we'll talk more about this, but I do have a lunchtime blocked, so that's good.
Yeah.
And then I have one right after lunch, and then one right after that. And then there was one that I did get invited to that I can't go to. So
Like it's crazy. Yeah.
So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, could have been 5, but I can't do 2 meetings at once.
Right. So like literally over half your day, you're going to
Yeah.
be in a meeting.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like as long as I'm in the office, I will be in a meeting, maybe a little bit in the car as I leave.
Yeah.
And that's just part of it. And then, yeah, until I get home. So
Yeah.
those are my meetings.
Uh, it's so much, right?
It is.
Stephanie, how many meetings do you have today?
Okay, so I also have 4 meetings
Okay, yeah.
today. But I'm going to be really honest and say that's a little light for
I know.
me. I'm like, you guys see my calendar all the time. I probably average closer to 5 or 6 a day.
Yeesh. 6
Yeah.
meetings is so many meetings, Stephanie.
I have so many meetings all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but even if you think about today, so it's like if you work an 8-hour day, generally 50% of my day today is in meetings. And then I, like Bethany, and we will talk about this, I take a religious lunch break.
Yeah.
And I really safely guard that time. So really for me, I have 7 available, like meeting hours a day, because 1 hour I am taking a break and I'm taking lunch. And that's not to say that I don't work over lunch sometimes, but that is not an available meeting time. So out of 7 available meeting hours today, I have 4 booked, and typically it's more like 5 and a lot of times 6. That's a lot of meetings.
It's a lot. I have 5 today, and 2 of those meetings overlap each other. So like the last part of one meeting, I'm going to be leaving and jumping into the first part of another meeting. So yeah, it's
That's
a
the
lot.
worst. Because
It
when
is.
they're back to back, like I would say like Tuesday, that was my day. I think I had 4 hours of where it was like, oh yeah, this meeting ends at 10 and the next one begins at 10 and this one ends at 11, the next one begins at 11. And I will say, like, we'll talk about this too. I really try not to do that and give myself some buffer space, because otherwise, like, you don't even have time for like a bio break.
Yeah.
So try
Yeah.
to control that as well, so I can actually just like be a human being and use the restroom and get a glass of water, or like lay in the floor for a couple minutes to recover in between a
Yeah.
meeting.
Well, that's a good segue into the first question I was going to ask. Like, when you have days that your meetings are back to back all day, most of your day is in a meeting, by that last meeting, how effective are you?
Oh, I usually like preface the meeting with like, hey, everyone, just so you're aware, my brain is mashed potatoes at this point in the day. And so, like, if I'm not explaining something clearly, just tell me and I'll restate it. And that is like genuinely the phrase I use. Like, if you are a client who's worked with me and you're listening to this, you've heard me say my brain is mashed potatoes, just because that's how I feel inside of like you get from the to the end of the day and you're like, everything's a little slushy, and I'm kind of even trying to remember which meeting I'm in and what's happening right now and who are you, and remind me again why we work together. Like, obviously I don't say those things, but in your brain you're trying to like, you're moving so fast and you're switching so much that it's actually hard to stay focused.
Yeah, I think the switching part is the part that's for me, right? Because in some meetings, this is really normal for us. In some meetings, I'm with an executive and I'm talking about strategy and I'm very high level and we're talking about finances and it's like lots of brain power. And then the next meeting, we're like diving into the weeds of a process and solving problems that are very day-to-day operational, minute, like you got to do this and then you got to do this and then you got to do this and like mapping out these tiny little pieces. So we go from like very, very high level stuff to very, very minutia stuff. And the mind switch to do that is just so, I don't, for me, it's really hard to do sometimes. And I have to like shake myself a little bit and be like, okay, this meeting, I'm going to do this thing. And in this meeting, I'm going to do this thing. And then after all of the meetings, I have to go back and be like, what was I supposed to do in each of these things? I need to like take notes on this. I need to follow up on this. I need to do action steps on this. Right. And so it's just by the time you're done, it is completely not effective anymore. By the end of my day, I have zero effectiveness left. If someone called me and was like, hey, I need you to talk through this thing, I'd be like, nope, I don't think you do. You're not going to get peak Diana. Probably don't talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I do
yeah,
think
I agree.
yeah, it's
It's why
hard.
like I don't typically make like weeknight plans, because our work is so meeting heavy and you're doing that switching that by the end of the day you're just like mentally pretty tired. And I will say there is kind of a term for this that I learned a couple years ago, and I'm just going to say this up front of like, I have not dug deeply into this psychological research, but I did read a book that talked about this some. So go look this up if you're interested in. But it's a term called milkshake multitasking. And it's this idea, describes the idea that multitasking really like isn't truly performing multiple tasks simultaneously, because your brain actually can't do that. But it's this idea that multitasking is actually like this rapid shift of attention. And they call it milkshake because if you've ever seen like an old fashioned style milkshake be made, it's like it goes through and it's like literally in the cup and they're going "Rrr, rrr, 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 rrr." And so that's what your brain ends up looking like by the end of the day. But they say like when you have to rapidly shift attention, it's the opposite of deep thinking and good mind management. And so like typically when you're having to do that milkshake multitasking, yeah, you lack concentration, you make more mistakes, you retain less information, and you actually have altered brain function. So we're doing not very nice things to our brains sometimes when we
Yeah.
schedule our days this way.
And I think I read somewhere that it takes 15 minutes for your brain to like switch on a task. So, man, if that's true, the first 15 minutes of every meeting, I am not switched yet. That's the
I,
reality.
I'm just gonna say, I feel like this is like all of our brains right now just because of technology, because it's like we are constantly multitasking. We're constantly like doing a meeting and being like, oh yeah, I need to like add something to my like grocery list. And oh yeah, I forgot. Like to me, I was like, I get these school like reminders for my kids and they're like, sign this and don't forget it's this dress up day. And it's like all these things. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And like that's happening in the background. And meanwhile, I'm still doing like my job. And so there's just so many inputs all the time for all of us too, that it's like, I think we're like all milkshake multitasking, like literally always. So
Oh, totally, totally. Um, I read a book last year. It's called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. And so he is like kind of a investigative journalist writer, but he kind of digs into like what you were saying, Bethany, of like some of this is like a culture issue. And the advent of the internet and social media has really changed the way that we live and the way that we work, especially on a day-to-day basis. And we were kind of talking about this even going into this topic to prep of like, you know, before COVID and before everything was virtual and digital, you may have still had a lot of meetings, but maybe not as many, or you weren't able to book a back-to-back meeting because you had to physically like change locations. And you're like, well, that meeting can't start at 10 because I've got to walk from this part of the building to that part of the building, or I've got to drive here or this to that client. And now most of us, if we have those, we'll just call them more like white collar professional jobs. If we're not in a space where we're on our feet a lot, we're sitting in the same chair all day and just like clicking from meeting to meeting. And so we've kind of created this world in which this kind of bad brain work is really possible, and not just possible, but almost like has become socially expected.
Totally. It's totally true. Yeah.
and it's convenient. I mean, it's convenient. Yeah. Like we feel like, oh, well, we can be more efficient if we just like don't have an in-person meeting too. So it's like a lot of times we almost prefer that because it's like, well, then I can get more in during a day. But then it leads to all the other things that we were just saying. So one of the things that we were talking about, Diana, I'm sort of pivoting a little bit. So if we need to, yeah, if I'm moving us, you can slap my hand. But
No way. Great.
no, I was just thinking about one of the things that we talked about earlier was uh is this bad? Like if your job is just meetings, is that wrong? Are we supposed to not be doing as many meetings? Like, what if this is what your job has become and you're sitting here thinking like, I'm spending my whole day in meetings, and is this just what it is now, or are we doing something wrong and should it be set up different? Am I missing a different part of my job that I should be doing?
Totally. I think that's such a great question because I think jobs have shifted too, right? I think a huge part of our jobs literally is meetings, right? It's facilitating meetings, it's talking to people, um it's scheduling me. A big part of our job is meetings. And I also think that my husband, who I started this conversation with, he was like, I think my job is meetings. I think it's just I got to be in a lot of meetings, and then I delegate work, and I like don't have a lot of time to do my own work, and maybe I don't have a lot of work. Maybe my job is really meetings. So I don't know. Has work shifted? I think maybe some of it has. Maybe that is some people's jobs.
Yeah, I mean, and that is kind of true of our role, right? Like sitting as the consultant, like that is our primary way of communicating with our clients and working with our clients. And because we do have clients across the country who like we physically can't go be with them on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, our job is kind of meetings. And so I think it's a great question. And I think something that you just need to think about of like, okay, yeah, if this is my job, if my job is meetings, which also I'm going to say sounds a little depressing to say as an adult, so maybe we can make a fun phrase for that.
If my job is work parties, work
Ooh, okay.
required parties,
Yeah,
Parties all day.
there we go. There we go. I just needed the positive spin for that. So that way, like, when your great aunt or somebody asks you at Thanksgiving what your job is this year, don't say meetings. But like it's work parties. But I think like for us, when we know, if like kind of we know that is like generally the nature of our work, then it's like, okay, how do we create some healthy boundaries around our other time? Like I will say, for example, like I do not allow all 7 hours of my available meeting hours to be booked with meetings. Like I try to like watch my calendar like a week ahead at least. And if a day is starting to get really booked up, like blocking some time and doing that. And I mean, I think the other side of the coin, if you're hearing this and you're like, oh no, my primary job is not meetings, but now I'm in meetings all day. Like, how do I regain control of my day again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even if your job is all meetings, how do you regain some of that control? I think that's what we should totally talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. There are certain jobs where it's like, it's very clearly you should be doing something other than meetings. Like, I think about like my husband as a teacher, and if he was in other meetings all day and not in front of his students, then that's a problem, you know? So, and so it's figuring out like, even in that space is like, how much do they need collaboration? How much should they be meeting versus like, how much do they need to just have that time in front of their students in the classroom or working on grading or things like that, right? So there's a clear differentiation on what that job looks like. But then there's other jobs where we think about like Diana, your husband, and he's an executive within a hospital, and it's like, well, probably he should be in meetings most of the time. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be the majority of what he's doing because he's got a team of people who are out doing some of the other work and the execution of things. And so for him to be in meetings, like as long as they're effective, that's exactly where he should be. And in fact, yeah, like depending on your role and maybe the higher up within an organization, it's probably more likely that you're just going to be in a lot of meetings all the time too, but you want to make sure that they're effective too. So what was the last question that you just asked, Diana, that you said like we should talk more about that? I think it was more of the like, how do
What do you
you
do?
manage all the meetings then? What are
Yeah.
things you need to do, right?
How do you regain some control in that?
That's
Because
it.
even
Regain
if
some
your
control.
job is like all meetings or not all meetings, what are some tactics? What are some things you can do?
Mhm.
How do we create space and time for our brains to not be so milkshaky or to settle and then go be milkshaky again? You know, like what do we
Yeah.
do? How do we fix it?
Yeah. So, I mean, one we've already kind of mentioned a little bit, and Bethany and I both mentioned like lunch. And I think lunch is a great example of this, of just like you have to build breaks into your day. And so, and I know there's people who are listening to this who never take a true break throughout your day. And we are all guilty of that at different points, right? But I'll just share, like, just to kind of tell the story. Like when I started at People Centric, I like was watching other people's calendars, and I'm trying to kind of feel out the culture a little bit of like, okay, how are people managing their work and their days, and what's it looking like? And our team is very, we have a very open culture of feedback. And so I just remember I was maybe like 2 or 3 months in at the time, and we were talking about like, how do we manage our schedules better? And I just kind of said to everybody, I was like, well, so like, is it pretty normal that you guys never take a lunch? And like, I'm noticing like you guys schedule meetings over the lunch hour, or it's like working lunches. Like, is that like pretty normal? It's just so I'm thinking through like the right number of hours in a day. And I remember all of you like turning and looking at me like super wide eyed, and you were like, oh no. Like, is that the
Yes.
culture that our new team member is picking up? Is that you just work through the entire day, you never take a break? And it was like, I'm just gonna say this is like, it was a good culture call out, I think, for our team. And I'm not saying that to give myself credit, but just to recognize we're like,
But it was. It
we
was
got to
good.
practice what we preach here. And so like I know from that moment then, like we all just like, okay, everybody on our team put lunch on your calendar so that way it does not get booked. Because we schedule our own meetings, but then we also use meeting scheduling tools where somebody else can put time on our calendar. And you have to tell those schedulers like what time to respect and what time they can take. And so like everybody on our team now has, like, if you looked at our calendars, there's a lunch break built in where there's at least 1 hour a day where you are not accepting meetings, and can take that time or blocking off like other times. So like I don't like to come in and have an 8 a.m. meeting, and the first thing I do for the day is to like jump into a call, because then I know I'm going to get a 9 o'clock scheduled. I know I'm going to get a 10 o'clock scheduled. Those are like the two most popular meeting times of the day, is from 9 to noon. And so I block my 8 o'clock so that people can't schedule meetings. And it's not to say that I would never have an 8 a.m. meeting, but then it's like I am offering that versus like somebody could put that on my calendar, or that's just open space. And I think a lot of people on our team do that, or they block like the last hour of the day to say that is the least ideal meeting time, because we also know at the end of the day, we're pretty milkshakey, right? And that's not our best quality work to give our clients. And so we reserve those times of day for things like emailing or like catching up and organizing stuff, like cleaning your desk. Like those are like my like 4 p.m. type tasks, because I know they don't require as much like crazy mental effort, or that's when I schedule meetings or I do those things. And so I guess all that to say is like one way you can regain control is you can actually block your calendar, and you can set specific times of day when you wouldn't have a meeting. And you know, the other piece that we haven't talked about, or I haven't said yet with this, and you guys can jump in, is also like thinking about like what times of day are best for you to do things. And there, each of us has kind of like our peak working time, and don't waste your peak working time on answering emails. And so even thinking about blocking your day that way.
Yes, I totally agree with that. So I think that, and then there's times and seasons that like I will block things more than others, just because it's like a crazier season and I have to like literally make that space on my calendar if other things won't happen. And so, and then there's other times where I just sort of know like, okay, I'm in these meetings here, you know, at these specific times, or I'll try to schedule my meetings with that sort of in mind, without actually putting like okay, I'm going to check my email at this time and this time. Or I'm going to work on this other thing at this time and this time. I just kind of know in certain seasons. But there have been times where it's like, gosh, there's so much going on, and if I don't put some time on the calendar to work on like this deliverable, it's just not going to get done. And so taking time to do that is, I think, really helpful. One of the other things you talked about too in this is like actually closing your email during the day when you're in your meetings, which some people freak out that we even would suggest that you would close your email out and like turn off your notifications. But it's like, it's really okay. If that's not your main job, then like you don't need to have your email open the whole day. And that doesn't mean you don't need to check your email at all that day. It's just like, just choose when you're going to do it and only check it for that amount of time and then close it. And because I think it's like the reality is you're not actually as like effective or efficient by having it open all the time. It's just going to be something that's making you less effective in the meetings that you're in, because you can't actually get to all the stuff that you're doing. Or if you're answering emails while you're in that meeting, then the meeting's not going to be good. So it's like you're not giving your best work in either place because it's divided. So your attention is divided. And so just pick one place to be if you can, and feel some freedom around that. Like it's okay if you don't answer an email in 2 minutes when you get it.
Yeah, we talked about actually kind of this in a podcast a couple back. I can't remember the title, so I'm so sorry. But we talked about like the benefits of a slower response sometimes, and that like there are probably quite a few emails that we get that you could do a rapid response, right? Just like quick answer to a question or a quick scheduling thing or this or that. But there are some emails that we get that require some deeper thinking, or they require some research. And so, yeah, like Bethany was saying, like when we are checking and responding to emails constantly, then that means that we're really never leaving time for deeper thinking and deeper work on anything that we get emailed about. And I think if you really thought about it, there's probably emails that you get that would benefit from you sitting and thinking about this, or looking into it a little more before you reply. So check out that podcast episode. And I think it's a couple back. I'm so sorry. I am like, I hate when people do that. They reference it and then they don't tell you what it is. And here I am doing it.
It's not that long ago. So
it wasn't that long ago. But the other thing we'll say here, we talked about this earlier, Diana mentioned like that 15-minute reset. That applies to just like any distraction. So when that ding happens on your phone for an email, or you just see it because you visually see it, or it pops up on your screen, that pulls you out of what you're doing, and it takes you that 15 minutes to get back into flow and train of thought. And Bethany's right. Like when we bring this up to people often, they're like, no, I couldn't ever do it. Or like, I'm very open about the fact that I do have not had email notifications turned on for my phone, I think for about 5 years. I think it's about 5 years now, if not longer than that. Because I got to a certain point of realizing, and I'm going to say this and you guys will laugh, this is a very Stephanie Anderson way of thinking about it. But I was like, there are no rules anywhere that say that I, number one, have to have my work email on my personal phone, or that if I do, there is no rule anywhere saying I have to have these notifications turned on. And as a person who struggles with anxiety, I was realizing, number one, this is piquing my anxiety to get these things all the time because it made it feel like I had to respond. But also, I realized it was distracting me all the time from what I was doing, either in my workday or like in the evenings or weekends with my friends and family. And all of a sudden, I'm in this cool moment with my family, and then I get pulled out and I'm thinking about work stuff. And frankly, I got really annoyed by that. And so I turned them all off. And like, I don't even have on my laptop where like my email does not pop up notifications for me. So I look at my email when I have time to look at my email. And yeah, I'm still responding probably to everybody within about 24 or 48 hours. There are a couple that will go longer than that. But for the most part, I'm still responding to everybody on time. So, because that's the very first pushback I get. Oh, so you're just not responding to people quickly. No, I still am, but I'm actually just being realistic with my time and saying I can't constantly respond. And that's not good work for me. It's not realistic. And that is not the lifestyle that I want, that I have to be constantly thinking, and I can't control when I think about work.
That's good. Yeah, you are putting yourself in control and not letting your emails control you. And I've been there. I feel like as you were talking, I was like, oh, I just felt like a little bit like I just had like flashbacks to like my first job right out of college and trying to figure all of that out and being like, oh my gosh, I'm like answering emails in the evening because I can't, like, I don't know how to, I feel like I have to empty my inbox every day, before I go to sleep. And you probably don't. You probably don't, unless your boss told you that you do.
Well, I'm just going to say this, and Diana can maybe either verify or debunk me. I have not seen it in anybody's handbook, HR handbook before, that there is a rule that says you have to have notifications for your email turned on, and they have to be on your personal cellular device or on your laptop, and that you have to empty your inbox every day. Like, I've never seen that as a policy. I have seen policies about response times, and we talked about that in that podcast episode I referenced. But I've never seen those type of rules. And so it's like for me, it kind of broke my mind when I realized that I was like, oh my gosh, these are all made up work culture things.
The other thing is that most of the time, an email is not a life or death situation. And if it is, you should pick up the phone. Like, don't send an email for that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, I think it's slowly become more widely culturally appropriate that it takes 24 or 48 hours to answer an email. I think back in the day when email was new, it was like, answer 2 minutes, you get it, you send it, you get it, you send it. And I just feel like now that we have Slack and Teams and all of these other ways to communicate with each other, email just isn't the place to do that. If you really need a quick response, email is not the place to do that.
Also, since we're talking about meetings, the other thing is to like leverage your meetings. So if you're getting emails that are like, it's not effective for you to respond, and you already have meetings on your calendar and those, on those topics with those people, like utilize your meetings and make it efficient. And so take that email and like take it right into that meeting and say like, yeah, let's talk about this. If it's appropriate to do so, if it's for that meeting, right? So utilize your meetings well, I guess, is another tip so that you can eliminate the email distractions. This is sort of like I almost didn't even say this, but it seems like a really simple thing, but I've just like built this in. And I don't think everybody does this actually, as we've worked with clients and we talk about some of this stuff, is like to be effective in your meetings. If you do have a meeting heavy job, is like look at your calendar for the next day. I know, like it seems really simple, but like I don't think everybody does that. Like they just kind of roll into their day and they're like, okay, like I'm just gonna let the notifications tell me when to show up to a meeting. And then you really have no idea. You have concept of like what your day looks like and what meetings you have, and do I have a break, and do I need to plan for something? Do I need to think about it? And so I think, so people just go from meeting to meeting to meeting because that's just what their calendar is telling them to do. But I think it's like if you are taking some proactive time, either at the beginning of the week and or the day before, ideally both, to sort of have a good handle on, just look at your calendar and be able to say like, what do I have going on today? Just so I can have a general concept. Don't over plan and prepare. That's not what I'm saying. It's just like, but know which meetings you do need to spend more time thinking about and which meetings that you don't need to. And you can kind of like be there, and you know that it's going to take a little brain space, a little less brain space than some of your other ones. And so you don't feel like you're having to like over prepare in different places or to be completely unprepared for all of them. And then it helps you also to do what some of the things like the Stephanie was saying, is to be able to effectively build in some extra time to say like, okay, I know that this is what my day looks like, so I'm going to create some intentional space here, here, and here to get up and move around or go somewhere or to get a coffee or to whatever I need to do to help myself be able to like continue forward and not be just sitting in one place all day. So anyways.
Yeah,
Totally agree with that.
I do too. And one other thing I was thinking is that as a person who schedules meetings for others a lot, I look at those calendars pretty carefully. And if that person that I'm trying to get the meeting with has 5, 6, 7 meetings already, I skip that day. That they're not going to be an effective person for me. They're not going to be the right person in that meeting. So I'll skip that day. I'll move to something else. Most of the things that we are working on are not incredibly crazy time sensitive, and it can wait a day, right? And so I don't know if there's a way to install that or in an organization or try to make that like culturally what you guys do. But I do think as someone, if you're scheduling a meeting, you should kind of look at that person's day in general and be like, are you going to be okay in this meeting? I don't know.
That is such a kindness that you do to us because I can tell you, like, I know that you do that. And I think our team tries to do that for each other too.
Yeah.
Um, or if it's like, hey, I'm so sorry, this is the only day that this would work, we ask before we put it on the calendar. But I agree with you. It is a culture thing on your team. And, if we're thinking about how do you install that, I think you just talk about it, right? And you just bring it up. And so, it's kind of like you have to almost like approach this problem from two sides. Of number one, I think start doing some of the things that we talked about, of like block off your calendar for different times. And like our team will see this sometimes on my calendar, it's just a block and it says blocked working time. And they know that that means that like I need some time and space just to like work on the stuff that's in front of me or work on a deliverable for a client, and that they should not book a meeting over that without like asking my permission, and that I may still say no. Right. So I think like you got to kind of block on this side, and then you got to also like block on the other side by just making it an open conversation and just going to the people around you and saying like, hey, this just feels like an unsustainable pace for me to keep up, or I'm running out of time in the day to do some of the work that I need to do. And so if you see that my day looks very, very full, could you look for another day, or could you come and ask me before you do that? And I know it's a little vulnerable to do that because I think in the workspace, sometimes this type of stuff gets like termed as like weakness, because you're like, oh, well, she just can't handle everything. She's not getting all of her done. She must not be managing her time well to not be able to fit that in. And I think those are lies, right? And that's not helpful. And I think it's negative, like inner talk that we have about ourselves and sometimes we have about other people, that sometimes the reality is, and I think because of everything we've talked about, especially the digital world we live in today, we are able to schedule more work than we are actually able to complete. And so that's the reality. Someone could have excellent time management skills, but because of how we schedule now, we are able to schedule more work than we're actually able to do. Because if you think back, like, gosh, even maybe 20, 30 years ago, and maybe even less than that in the workforce, there were no digital schedulers. And this is where, we've seen like the administrative assistant as a job is really declining in our world, because now we have digital tools for all those things. But it used to be you had to go to that scheduler, the person on the team who managed the team's calendars and where they were going and when. And that person would make discretionary calls. And so they could do what Diana was saying of like, well, like Diana looks really busy on this day, so I'm going to give them this day instead and just not offer that, right? But now it's digital, and what we haven't done, I think, is we haven't matched those same level of boundaries that we used to talk with that person on our team, and we used to have these conversations with them, or they would accommodate things for us. And these digital tools don't intuitively know that. They're not humans, and they can't think about whether this is realistic for you. And especially the AI bots, like they're not thinking about whether it's realistic for you. They're looking at, you told me you have 8 hours in a day, and I've only scheduled 7 hours of meetings. And so I could put an 8th hour because that is the parameters you've given me. And so I think we just still need to have those same conversations, because the digital tools are awesome. Right. And they really do help us, but we still need to be sure we're having those same conversations with our team about what's actually realistic, what's reasonable, what boundaries do we need to create, so that way this is a sustainable job and people don't get burnt out just trying to do their jobs well.
I love that. Yeah. What else should we talk about? I feel like we could talk about the intrusiveness of meetings and back-to-back stuff and calendars and all of that. I feel like there's so many things that this bleeds into, and we could talk about this for 25 days straight. But we all have other meetings we have to get to. So
yeah, I'm like, there's meetings to be had. So this podcast can't
had.
last too long.
That's right. That's right. Do we miss any of the big ones, do you think?
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of good ground here. And I think, just to say, like, really, if you're struggling with this, I would go back and like look at your role. And like maybe that even means pulling out your job description or going to your leader and just saying, like, hey, I need some clarity on like, what is the main objective of my job? If I'm super successful in my role, what does that look like? Because I think Bethany shared a good example earlier of like maybe the difference between like a consultant and an educator, right? The key objective of an educator is to educate students. And so if they are doing their job really, really well, then most of their time should be student facing, which would mean they're probably in fewer meetings versus like us as consultants. Our job is to work with the client, and how we do that is in meetings together. So it makes sense that we're in a lot more meetings. And so I think like if you feel like you've just completely lost control over all of this, and like even some of the tips that we're giving feel overwhelming, like maybe start there and just think about like, what is my role? What does success look like? Because I think you're right, Dana, when you were describing like your husband's like moment of like, I think my job is maybe meetings. And so then at least it allows your brain to like stop having that narrative that like this is all bad and I need to change it. Because I think that's also a cultural thing, is like meetings have kind of turned into a dirty word in business, and everybody's like, the goal should always be to have fewer meetings. And I think what we see a lot of times when we get into an organization is, yeah, maybe there's 1 or 2 meetings that we don't need to be having anymore. But more often than not, we find that people are missing meetings, that they've not created a place for people to talk about things, to collaborate and work together, that there are pieces of work we need to do that can't happen over an email and be the same quality of work. So I think it is just looking at that. And again, you can do meeting audits with your teams. There's a lot of tools and tricks out there. And so if that's something you're interested in, we can talk with you about that. Like, how do you effectively do a meeting audit to figure out, are our meetings still effective? Are they still engaging? But yeah, that's all I guess what I would add to is just to kind of like start there and think about like, what does success look like in my role? And do I need to feel the way that I feel? Is it valid? And it might be valid and maybe you have way too many meetings, or you might be like, oh, you know what? I think I just need to like maybe detach some of that negative connotation from a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. The other thing I thought of is that I have seen organizations do this, like, we're just not going to meet on Wednesdays. No one in the company will have a meeting on Wednesday. And let me just tell you the chaos that creates. It creates
The
chaos.
mess.
And it usually does not work. I haven't seen it work. I don't know. Usually all that means is that they're cramming meetings into the rest of the days, the same amount of meetings. They didn't do anything to eliminate stuff. They just crammed them in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and took out Wednesday. And man, please don't make that mistake.
Please don't do it. Yeah. To tell a quick story, I was at a conference once and this CEO was speaking. It was a white male CEO. And he was talking about how he did calendar blocking and he did days, but he was really struggling. And so what I'm going to say, the heart behind this and the intention was really, really good. I heard him say this and then I was like, oh, that's going to be a disaster. That he was really mentally struggling because he just felt like he was making decisions all day long. And so he was getting decision fatigue, which is a very real thing, right? It's absolutely a real thing. And so his solution to that was to have decision days and non-decision days. And so there were certain days on his calendar where his team could bring him things that required him to make decisions, and then other days that they could not. So that way he could like mentally cleanse. And again, I'm not going to give the punchline on this one, so we don't spend a whole nother hour just dissecting that. But Diana was right. It didn't actually reduce the number to me, because then I could see reactions from his team, was kind of watching that company from afar. Like I had enough proximity to actually this company to kind of know what it felt like to work there. And it didn't seem that it was actually reducing the number of decisions that he had to make. It was just stressing the team out to try to figure out when they could bring him decisions. And so my recommendation would be there, if like you heard that and you're like, ooh, maybe a good idea, actually just look at it and say, like, am I involved in too many things in our company? Am I the thing that's holding up work? Because if I have to be involved in this many decisions, then maybe there's something else there, that it's not that like I need to schedule days. Maybe I need support. Maybe I need to offload tasks. Maybe we need to hire someone else on our team who can do some of these other things. So, just not to take us off on a huge tangent there, but yes, like those type of day strategies, I totally get the intent behind them. Just in all practicality, they don't really work.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that also shows like how complicated this issue is, right? It's just, there's so much nuance to a meeting, right? And what all of those are doing and why you're spending your time there and how you're making all of that work. And it really does, it affects everything in an office and in a work environment. Those meetings, critical or non-critical, affect everything. So yeah, I think meetings are absolutely a necessary evil. You just have to do them the right way. And what we're saying is it's complicated.
Yeah. Or they could even be a joy, right? They could even be a joy, and you could really enjoy your job in meetings. Like I will say, like most of our job is meetings, and I really enjoy those meetings. Yeah. So sometimes it's just like unattaching some of that negative language you have in your head about meetings. Because if a meeting what helps me be really successful at work, then I love it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And if you're sitting in a meeting and hate it, you might wonder why you hate it and try to fix that. So anyway, that's a whole other topic. Fix your meetings, whole other topic. If you guys think we missed something, have questions about this, want to talk through it with us more, send us an email, send us a Instagram, slide into our DMs, whatever you want to do. Just let us know. The outro can tell you how to get a hold of us. Otherwise, we will talk to you next time. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and